Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing prices here in EU5 as part of a mini-series on markets. Specifically, prices are the underpinning of all value in EU5. We will talk about why they are important, then we will talk about the equation used to determine price, then we will talk about this effective supply and demand, what's all that about, and finally we will discuss why exporting a good can actually decrease its price and importing a good can actually raise its price, which is a very non-intuitive play pattern, but is important for collapsing the price of goods so that you can get your constructions going for cheaper. So most value in EU5 is going to be created by the production and trade of trade goods. One such example here is gold, which has a base price of 10. The base price is going to be modified based on supply and demand, or effective supply and demand, to get the actual price. The actual price of gold here is 6.62, despite the base price being 10. It's multiplied by minus 33% because there is more effective supply, though nominally, you may notice, there is more supply than there is demand for the good, but despite this, the effective supply is much, much higher. Now, this is going to be used to determine how much value is gained in production, where we are producing gold here, and you can see the profit per level is equal to 2.85. Decidedly, that's considerably less than the 6.67, but if you do the math, the 6.67 multiplied by the control and also the market access, as well as the fact that this gold produces a little bit of extra gold per level, you will get that same figure of around 2.85, and this is how much is added to the tax base, and so that's going to be added value. If the price of gold were 33% higher, or was equal to base price, this entire figure would be 50% higher, or thereabouts, and we would get about 5 added to the tax base per level, which we can then extract via the estates by taxing the estates. The second way is by trade, and you may notice there's going to be a lot of trade in the market. The trade value is going to be determined based on buying the price in the exporting market and selling it in the market that is importing it, and so these two prices are going to matter a lot as well, where if you have a very inexpensive price like we do in the Sofala market, we may not get as much from tax base, but we will get more for trade because we buy it at the Sofala price, we sell it at this price, we have extra expenses and various manipulations that allow us to make more or less, and then we will also have to pay trade maintenance, and once all that is said and done, we will have a profit which is then distributed to the crown and the estates based on the crown power split, which is going to inform how much trade income you get as a proportion, but the value is going to be created in these two ways of both trade and also the creation of tax base by the selling of all the goods that are in the location. And just to be clear why this is so important, especially with production buildings rather than RGOs, we have here tools which have a price that is roughly speaking equal to the base price, 3.04. The input price is a little bit expensive, and we also have some production efficiency where we gain extra outputs. With all of this together, we are generating from the sale of the tools that we are producing 31 ducats, and the cost of the inputs is 20 ducats. If the price of tools were to drop to around 2, what would end up happening is that the income would decrease by around 33% because we dropped the price by 33%, and our potential profit would go from 11 ducats to very nearly 0 ducats. And so price is going to very strongly affect how much money we get out of things. This would very significantly decrease the tax base in this location, insofar as the tax base is informed by the production of tools. Another important impact of prices are the prices of the goods that are used as inputs when constructing buildings, because if they are cheap, this will reduce the cost of the building or producing the building, and if they are expensive, this will increase the price of the building, which means that on a per ducat basis, if you have a minus 33% discount building and a full price building, the full price building will have to be a full 50% more profitable or more valuable than the minus 33% discount in terms of the math for it to be worth it. And so the collapse of prices that are used as the inputs for the things that you are building is a very fundamental play pattern here in EU5, and so you do want to know how to collapse prices here. So, big thanks to this idiot here who stumbled onto the forums and asked for the precise equation that is used to calculate prices, because it is not a linear equation, it is not straightforward. The good people of the forums, of course, were happy enough to help him figure out what the exact price or exact price equation was, and by help him figure out, I mean do it for him, and they came up with this, where the only thing that is a little bit uncertain is whether or not this number is 1 or some number that is mathematically approaching 1. And of course, to analyze this, and this is really important to emphasize, pay attention here. To analyze this, we're going to need a spreadsheet. And of course, spreadsheets are not okay for anyone under the tender age of 38. So if you have a child, please make them leave the room. Make them leave the room in any way you see fit. Throw them in a pillowcase, chain them to the radiator, toss them down the stairs, because what happens next is not going to be appropriate for their eyes. I'll give you guys a second. So, we have this equation here reproduced in a slightly easier to read format. The two most important variables, or the two largest factors here, are going to be effective supply and demand, where effective demand is in the numerator and effective supply is in the denominator, such that whenever effective demand is greater than effective supply, the number will be greater than 1, 1 being 100% or base price, and the opposite is going to be true whenever supply is greater than demand, the number will be positive but less than 1. We have a table kind of representing a series of outcomes here where we can change the variable of price stability, but what we will have is, in terms of how we represent it, it will be similar to in-game, where base price is represented as 0%, and so anytime we have more supply than demand, you will see that the price will go into the negative as it is represented in-game. So if gold is base price 10, and then we have a effective supply of 12 and effective demand of 8, we will expect to see minus 26.8%. Now, of course, there are some more variables in here that are worth explaining, the first of which is this 1. This 1 factor is going to pull things more towards base price when there are really low buy and sell orders, because it's being added to both the numerator and the denominator, which is why you could see when we have double the supply, in the instance of having 8 goods versus 4 goods, we will have a price that is closer to base price than when we have 80 versus 40. This is because it is being pulled in this direction. This gets a lot stronger when the numbers are much smaller. So if we were to come much closer to 1 itself, you can see that if we have a supply of 1 and a demand of half, it will be pulled to minus 21.7%. This is one of the reasons why stuff that has no demand, stuff like copper and tin in lots of instances, can still be profitable, because it's getting pulled towards base price by this 1 figure. However, if you start to oversupply it, it will very quickly become unprofitable. After that, you are going to need demand to make things profitable, and so this is just generally going to have a stabilizing effect. Also, it makes it so that inputs which you lack or don't quite have enough of will not be apocalyptically expensive at kind of the lower end. Then we have price stability, which is represented in kind of 2 ways here. It is represented as a flat value, and it is represented by multiplying the other side of things. So in the case of the numerator, which has demand, we are multiplying the supply times the price stability and adding it to the numerator. This is just generally going to pull prices towards a base price. You can see that price stability will vary per age. It starts out at 10% and eventually goes towards 2%, which means prices will be more volatile in later ages. If you are producing a ton of goods, you will drop the price below base price, in which case being in the earlier ages will effectively act as a stimulus, because it is going to pull you in the direction of base price. You can see if we adjust this to 10% and we are producing an extra amount of goods, we have 48 over 24, the price is going to be minus 42% or very close, whereas if we're in the later ages, it's going to be minus 47%. So this is a very slight variable, but it does cause prices to be, as you might expect, a little bit more stable in the earlier game and a little bit more responsive to supply and demand in the later portions of the game. Let's take a look at gold in the Safala market again. Roughly speaking, it has a supply of 67, a demand of 70, and yet, despite having greater demand than it does supply, it actually has a price that is considerably lower than base price of 6.62 or minus 33.6%. That is because of the mechanic of effective supply and demand, wherein not all supply and demand is created equal. Instead, the supply and demand that is created locally within the market by both production and consumption is going to be worth more when it comes to informing price. You might notice that our effective supply is 66.99, which is the same as our actual supply. That is because all of our supply of gold within the market is produced here locally, and so it will have a full weight of 100% and will count entirely towards the effective supply. However, our demand, our effective demand, is considerably lower than our actual demand. That is because most of our demand for gold is actually coming from exports. We are exporting a ton of gold, which is going to be affecting the price less. The value or weight of exports when actively traded is going to be worth half that of stuff that is produced locally, which means it will affect price a whole lot less, which incidentally helps us to trade the good more, because trade, you gain value equal to the difference between price in the two markets. And so while we cannot long-term trade more gold than we produce, as we deplete the stockpile, there is a stockpile here, we will not be able to long-term be able to trade away more than we produce. It will keep the price low, which means the margins for the trade will be good, so we will be able to constantly maintain the trade. And so this is going to be a mechanic which enables trade. However, not all trade weights are created equal, and this is an important detail. Instead, the trade weights that are coming from the active trades will affect prices less than those that are coming from the burger trades. The burger trades will instead have a weight of 75% instead of 50%, and this is an important detail. Alright, so without talking too much about the math, because I know there may be kids in the next room in a pillowcase listening, let's talk about context a little bit. Most of the demand that is happening locally within the Safala market, that is not from trade, is from this gold-based jewelry. What would happen if we were to increase the amount of gold-based jewelry we are producing in the market? Well, the first thing that would happen is we would be making a lot less from trade here. A lot less from trade from two factors. First of all, because the proportion of our demand that is coming from local orders would rise, the price of the good would rise. So from each of our trades, because it is based on the margin between this 6.62 buy price within the Safala market and wherever we're selling it, as we squeeze the margin smaller, we would be earning less per trade. Not only that, we would actually be trading less of the good, because there's still a finite amount of gold. The effective supply and demand do not change the amount of goods actually produced or consumed. They only affect price. There's still a finite amount of goods. We're operating at a deficit, or we can, because we have a stockpile. This would not be sustainable without a stockpile, and so if we are producing more stuff locally within the market using gold, so if we are buying more gold within the market, consuming more of it within the market, there will be less of it available to trade. If we were to double the gold-based jewelry, we would have to lose, roughly speaking, 11 trades worth of trades, and so we would be getting less from trade in two different ways, right? However, we would also be benefiting from it in another way, in that we would be generating more local tax base in locations that are producing jewelry. This is because the production of jewelry is going to be adding to the tax base here. You can see that it is adding 10 to the tax base, or base tax base, before it's manipulated by the level of control that we have in the location. So in theory, this could be good or bad depending on how much you are able to tax, or also how much you are able to extract via trade, although we will, again, not unpack the mathematics on this, but when you are shifting income from trade to tax base, this is going to be meaningfully important. However, even with that consideration, we are mainly a trading nation here in Kilwa, and if we take a look, we would also have another effect downstream, which is we would be producing more jewelry. We would be having more jewelry just overall, and so our effective supply of jewelry would go up. Notice we have considerably less demand than we do supply, so we would just be adding to the supply of jewelry entirely, which would push the price down. Also, if the price is coming down, we are doing a lot of trades here as well. So the value of our trades of jewelry would go up by virtue of us both probably being able to trade more of them because we've dropped the price down even further, and also the margins of trades, or the margins on the trades, would likely go up as well. And so you would have to math out which one of these is better. Almost certainly production of jewelry would add additional value, but it is going to be doing it in a few different ways. One, our trade revenue from gold would go down. Our tax income from gold would go up because the price of gold goes up, and so the amount that it is adding to the tax base is also going to go up. And then our income from jewelry would also go up nominally in the tax base, even though the price went down, because we would be producing more of it, and it would also go up in trade. And so this would happen if we were to expand jewelry within this market and add additional jewelers. It looks like we've done all that we can within the province up Upper Save, which is where we are choosing to build it because of production efficiency. Because there is gold there, we do get a little bit of extra juice, and so we would prefer to build it here. It would be more efficient, and if we build it here, we would be producing more jewelry from the same amount of gold. That's how production efficiency works. And so the negative effects that we have from the consumption of gold, perhaps making us make less trade income, would be diminished, while simultaneously we are able to output more jewelry, giving us more supply, which would give us more effective supply, which would drop the price of jewelry even more. And also we do have the jewelry that we are just producing and seeing a profit on just by its production, even at the current level of prices. Even if the price dropped considerably, it would still be profitable. Notice the income is 32. The amount that is required to produce it is roughly 20. So we could still drop price as long as we don't drop price too much and still be achieving profit in all of our jewelers. Alright, so we also have this grouping of cells here, which will calculate the target price based on age. Remember, it does vary based on age, and it will do this based on what type of orders you have, or it will take into account the weighting of the orders, whether it's market 100%, burger trade 75%, active trade 50%. And if we think to the Safala example here, entirely our supply of gold was production within the market, so we'll just put 1,000 here. 1,000's a nice neat number, and this gives us an actual supply of course 1,000, and an effective supply of 1,000 because the weight is 100%, but very little of our consumption was happening within the market. Instead, we had roughly the same amount of actual supply and demand, but we had an effective demand that was much lower. So notice the actual supply and demand, both are 1,000, effective demand is 600, and with the numbers here, it's really easy to kind of see this illustrated. Half of this trade is going to be 400. 400 plus 200 equals 600, and we see a price that is pretty close to what we were seeing in the Safala market of minus 33%. And so what happens if we are to double the amount that is happening within the market in terms of the orders? Well, we can do that, but then our actual demand is in excess of our supply. That's not sustainable, and so we will lower this by 200 as well here. And what we will see is that relative in the age of discovery, the price will be 9% higher, or it will go from minus 35% to minus 26% in terms of the price. And so nominally it will be 9% higher, and the effective demand will go from 600 to 700 here, which makes some sense as well. Looking at this, let's consider a couple theoreticals. What if, for example, there was zero trade that was occurring? Well, this would actually be really bad for us, because not only would we not be getting value from trade, what would also happen is the price of gold would collapse even lower, and we would be getting less from the tax base here. But let's consider a scenario where we canceled all the trades. Nobody could trade with us, because if we canceled all of our trades, other people would just trade with us instead, and we would still be getting the buy and sell orders from active trades. We just wouldn't be the ones owning counting these trades. But what would happen if instead the burgers were the ones trading? If we canceled all this and let the burgers trade? Well, if the burgers were trading, the price would be considerably higher than the minus 26%. Instead, it would just be minus roughly 13% on the price, and this means we would be getting more from tax base. Now, in theory, there's possible like breakpoints where it makes sense or would make sense to cancel all of the trades to let the burgers trade, because you would have more tax base generated. Let's say you have 0% crown power and you completely ignore the fact that your estate's getting money is a good thing, because your estate's getting money from trade is valuable. If you completely ignore that and you only care about tax base, letting the burgers do the trade would actually generate more tax base, because the price of gold would go from this minus 26% price to this minus 12% price. And so where it is being produced, because the price would be higher, it would generate a little bit more value. Now, the reverse of this is, of course, also true. If you were trying to reduce the price of something within your market, and the burgers were currently exporting that good, you can actually reduce the price by starting to actively trade and export the good yourself. Let's say the good is at minus 13%, and we go from burger trades to active trades. By exporting the good, you would reduce the price of the good by around 13% here. And this is critically important when it comes to collapsing the price of goods, understanding this relationship so that you trade more effectively. Let's consider Venice here at GameStart, or anyone within the Venice market. We would like to expand out our RGOs. However, instead of getting the discounted 33 ducat price on RGOs, we have to pay 51. The reason being is that lumber within our market is expensive. If we take a look at the lumber price, we can see the buy and sell orders, and hey, supply and demand are equal. However, the price is above base price. The price is at an additional 9.4%. And this is because most of our supply, or a big chunk of our supply rather, roughly a third, is coming from the burgers imports. And all of our demand is local within the market, and so our weight is going to be such that our effective demand is 32.34 and our effective supply is 28.85. We jump back into the browser here, we have input some of these numbers, and we could see that we are getting a very similar outcome, where we are going to be having the supply from the burgers trades be 13.394, regular market supply is 18.41, and we have the actual supply and actual demand being equal. The burgers generally, with the way that they think, will try and import to kind of fill demand, especially for goods like this. And so anytime you're running a deficit of wood, you're expecting, or you're going to expect to see the burgers try and rectify that. If the burgers weren't trading at all, you would instead have a much worse price, where you would be having, plus 58% price, but the burgers in some sort of sense save you from this 9.85%. And so, okay, you have even supply and demand, you have enough goods to do everything you want, but not at the price you would like. You would prefer more expensive prices. Where the trap is a lot of people will just try and import as much wood as possible. And if we import 5 wood, what's going to happen is the burgers are going to import less because it's not a very lucrative trade for the burgers. They are just trying to resolve a bit of a deficit. And so instead, this would go to 8.93. And the price would actually go up by virtue of you importing the good. If we were to import all of our supply of the good, we would go to 13.93, right? The burger supply would disappear, and instead of plus 9%, we would be getting 22%. And so anytime the burgers are importing a good, and you try and import on top of it, you are actually not going to reduce the price of the good. You're going to increase the price of the good. And this is particularly nasty in instances where you are having these burger trades to resolve your supply, and you are trying to get the price low so that you can get the discount on your buildings. Alright, so as Venice, what should we do? Well, the first thing is probably early on, you should actually just ignore it and focus on your masonry-oriented buildings. The opportunity cost on these is lower, it's easier to collapse the price for you. It's a lot to overcome 14 burger trades worth of the good, because what you want to do is you really want to get all of the trades, instead of being any of them coming from burgers, you want to get them starting to come from just local orders, and so you want to just produce a whole bunch more wood. But this is a pretty big investment. It's like 15 lumber mills, and you should just ignore it, practically speaking. But let's say we're determined to collapse the price. Well, first of all, just making all your orders be market orders is preferable. The burgers will stop importing into the supply if you do that. But what if you try and do it through trade? What if you're saying, hey, okay, I recognize this 13.93, that's not going to cut it, right? That's actually going to raise the price, but I can just trade more than this. What if we did 30 trades? And okay, it looks like this actually would bring the price down, and it would. Except for burgers, nasty little creatures that they are, your burgers, now that the actual supply is in excess of the actual demand, your burgers can now export the good, and burgers from other markets can now import the good, and they're going to do it. And so they'll say, ooh, goody, look, a surplus of 16 wood, they're going to import this via the burger trades, and instead of actually bringing down the price, you'll actually raise the price as long as there are enough burgers to import it. Now, in theory, maybe you could do this with hundreds and hundreds of wood, but the main idea here is by trying to reduce the price by importing more of the good, you will actually raise the price because the burgers will start exporting the good to reach you to equilibrium of actual supply and actual demand. And not only will this not be effective at collapsing the price of wood, you will also be sacrificing a very significant amount of trade capacity in order to get this to happen. So that's not going to be effective. As we mentioned earlier, the thing is you have to produce it locally. You have to produce it locally, and you have to get this number, this 32.43, up to the actual demand. But here, the price will actually just be zero. We will have no discount. We will still be paying 50 ducats. And we don't want to be paying 50 ducats, right? We want the discounted price. I'm not sure exactly where the discounted price comes in and kicks in terms of the nominally what the price needs to be in terms of percent. But we are trying to get this below zero. So what exactly do we do here? How do we do this? Well, we produce an excess of the good. We need to produce more good of the good than we do a supply in order for the effective demand to be higher. And we don't need to do it a whole lot. We just need to get the price down a little bit in order to get the full discount. Well, here's the unfortunate thing. If we produce extra, right, the burgers, nasty creatures that they are, will say, hey, there's now a margin of 2.7. We're going to start exporting this. And this is often what happens. You produce a surplus, the burgers export it, and the price tends to feel a little sticky. You are collapsing the price, but it's taking you a large investment to do it. It's taking a lot of lumber mills to get a bigger and bigger surplus, and you just keep creeping up, and then the burgers keep creeping up, and it's like, no, terrible. And so what can you do about this? One, you can just produce enough lumber mills that you don't care. But two, you can also export the good. Because if you export the good, you are going to increase the actual demand. The actual demand cannot increase or cannot exceed the supply long term. And so if you export it, the burgers will be forced to cancel their trades. And instead of having this minus 4% price or minus 4% price in the age of discovery, you can have a minus 8% price in the age of discovery. By exporting the good, you lower the average weight of the demand, decreasing effective demand, decreasing price. And so you can actively export the lumber once you have an excess of market supply to market demand. You can actively export the lumber in order to decrease the price of the lumber. I do think that exporting both lumber and masonry to colonial markets in particular feels really good because you're both decreasing the price in the market you're exporting it from, albeit it generally costs quite a bit of trade capacity, and also you are providing a supply of it where it otherwise would not be. Remember, you do need to have a positive supply of the goods, and very often goods that are just completely running a deficit, or markets that are completely running a deficit, really do benefit from the introduction of the good, even if it is a good that is being traded. And so that way you can support your ability to build a whole bunch of RGOs, build a bunch of settlements and this type of stuff in these colonial markets. It really is quite nice, where otherwise it can be taking a long time to produce these types of things. Also, incidentally, if you're playing multiplayer, in theory, exporting to people you don't like is maybe a strategy, because you will introduce a lot of lumber sell orders in their market that are from trade, because you are actively exporting to them while simultaneously you are bricking your own burger trades, which is, I'm not sure if you both try and export to each other how that works, but in theory, the person who has, I believe you can only export if you have the cheaper good price, in which, and then you could just kind of shove it down your opponent's throat in kind of a little bit of an oblique way. But I haven't tested this at all in multiplayer. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Also, the spreadsheet is available. It should be in the pinned comment. Not necessarily that it will be, but it should be. And you can make a copy of this for yourself so that you will be able to change the numbers and fiddle around with this if you like. If you wanted to support the channel, you can do so by using my code Generalist when you are buying any sort of Paradox product on the Paradox official store. This doesn't save you any money, but it does send 12% of the sale my way. If you're not using USD, make sure you cross-check with Steam, because exchange rates can be a little bit different, but this is a good way to support the channel, especially if you like spreadsheets. Generally, the production of spreadsheets takes quite a lot longer than a normal video, and usually the videos don't do that great because children can't watch them. And so if you wanted to support in this way, that would very much be appreciated. But other than all that, y'all have a good one. You can let the kids back in the room. Bye-bye now.